It's been interesting the week that I've been here. There's been a lot of different discussions on different themes. I came to New York a week and a half ago for the Booksellers Association meeting, and then I've been doing Sunday to Sunday with all of you, Saturday night to now. It's interesting how there's been various themes to our conversations in different groups and different times, and one of them, for some reason, has been this question of why aren't more people interested in this path? Perhaps because we've been giving programs and showing our movie and just sort of trying to get the world interested, and it isn't. No matter how sincerely and we try. Now, there's always room for improvement in terms of marketing and promotion. We always are balancing two realities when we're making an effort to communicate spiritual teachings. One is those who are meant to come will be there. And the other was perfectly expressed by Swami Kriyananda once when he was involved in the founding of our center in San Francisco, 1978, 1979. He moved from Ananda village and was living in San Francisco and was essentially trying to replicate what he'd done a decade and a half earlier in teaching all over the area and raising money to build Ananda the first time out. But he was not doing it himself. He was sort of trying to guide us to be his eyes and ears and arms and legs and making things happen. We were not always skillful at it. In one particular event, we just completely botched his instructions, and he drove an hour and a half north of the city to give a program, and there was either no one or almost no one there. So we're leaving, and some devotee, well-meaning, but nonetheless says, well, I guess Divine Mother just sent the people she wanted to have there. And Swami said, please, allow a little space for human error. So there's always this balance between ourselves and grace and our personal effort and our focus and just so many mysteries about the way the divine life works. I think it was epitomized once when someone came to our temple in Palo Alto, and I can't remember now whether that person actually stayed around or not. But this was her summation after visiting our service. Wow, she said, everyone talks about overcoming the ego, but you guys really mean it. Just like that. And then some friend of Duti's was commenting and saying, you know, the problem with your path is that you can't smoke, you can't drink, you can't carouse. You know, it's like, I'll go over here where they'll let me do everything I want to do and just add a little bit in. There's a verse in the Bhagavad Gita, and I don't have it right memorized, but and I'm not really sure exactly how Swamiji translated it, because this is my memory from Edwin Arnold when I read it years ago. But he had this sequence of how people come onto the spiritual path. And it says at the beginning, and this is, we're talking many lifetimes of soul evolution, not just yesterday and today, although you'll find yourselves identified with all these parts. The first time someone speaks to you about the spiritual path, you immediately fall asleep. Just instantly. As soon as the challenge comes your way, the response to it is, and then you wait till the conversation is over, and then you wake up again, like this. The second time you hear it, it just goes right by. You have no idea what was spoken to you. You just wait till it's finished, and then you re-engage in the conversation. The next time you hear it, how many lifetimes does this represent? You're interested in the moment, and then you instantly forget it. It's just gone like that. And then finally you begin to want what's being told to you, and ultimately you make it your own. There's a very interesting comment at the end in one of the last chapters of Swami's book, The New Path, when he's just talking about spiritual families and how a master works and how the magnetism of a spiritual path begins to develop. And he talks about how each soul sort of gradually awakens to this potential and then develops the power to attract a spiritual blessing, is implied in the clause, and hold that blessing. And I've always been struck by the fact that it's two parts, because we do go through that period where it comes to us, it's very clear while it's happening, and then I don't know what happens. I've had many people in the course of, we've lived in the same area and run the same temple there for more than 25 years now in California where we are. So people will sometimes have been very active and then disappear for 10, 12, 15 years, and then they'll come back. And they'll sort of say, I don't know why I didn't stay. But some piece of karma just comes and takes you. Now, I'm not saying this to terrify you, although go ahead and be terrified. There's no harm in recognizing that this is not as easy as it seems, and that we cannot be casual about what we are given. The reading today touches on that point. God's grace is not always there. And when it is there, you have to really put everything you can into it. When you have a period of time when everything is effortless, you need to really work with that. But there's another aspect to it, and I'm having several points here. I always watch this with people. I mean, watch in the sense of, one of the great advantages of community is that we're not alone. Or of sangha, of fellowship. It doesn't mean that you have to always live together, but of being able to share the path with other people is that you don't have to do everything yourself. You can also learn from their experience. And in fact, Swami Kriyananda has described the Ananda communities as laboratories in which we get to see what the consequence of various attitudes is. And from our perspective, meaning at the base of the hill, you may randomly think that all of these different paths lead to the same place, and you don't necessarily know. But we can watch what happens. And sometimes people will just vaporize, is how I put it, because many people who come to our temple do not live in our community. So, and I don't necessarily know them outside of when they come into the temple that we have. So sometimes they'll just not show up. And I won't necessarily have any way to track them down. If they live next door to me, I can knock on the door. I remember when Ananda village was very small, and Swami Kriyananda was the only one who ever gave Kriya initiation. So every time he gave initiation, everyone in the community showed up. And in those days, we were not only a small community, we were a deeply impoverished one. So many people did not have cars, and everybody always knew where everyone was, because there was no place to go and no way to get there. So you were just always there. So this particular Kriya initiation, one man didn't show up. So Swamiji sent me the next day to ask him, where were you? And it wasn't a reprimand, he was concerned, where were you? So the man, who was a very forthright, honest fellow, said, I didn't feel like bowing down to the gurus or anyone else last night. So I reported it back to Swamiji, and he says, I can understand that. These moods come to all of us at different times. And he was just honest enough to just say it outright, and that was that. I mean, I'm pleased to say that 40 years later, he's still solid on the path. It was just a flash that passed through his mind. But sometimes people disappear from my view. And then a month later, a year later, or a decade and a half later, they'll come back in. And they'll often tell me, oh, I was having such a hard time. I was having trouble with my work. My marriage was breaking up. My son was addicted to drugs. My finances collapsed. Just make a list, whatever it is. And then the thought, and so I stopped coming to the temple. And I say, my. When things get really tough, that's the time when you have to turn toward it. But that is a very interesting thing that we watch in ourselves, that when we begin to get in trouble, the tendency, the nature of that is to contract back. I don't want God to see. And there was this little girl in our kindergarten. We run an elementary school. The little girl in our kindergarten, she was a very powerful child. And one day she was just being impossible. And the kindergarten teacher took her aside and, what is wrong with you today? Well, she said, every day when I come to school, there's an angel on my right shoulder and a devil on my left shoulder. And they both talk to me. This is what she says. And today I'm listening to the devil on the left side of my shoulder. Just like out of the mouths of babes. There it is all the time, the battle of Kurukshetra. We're always being pulled in these two directions. And what we have to appreciate is God is not surprised. We somehow imagine, I don't know, we were all so badly brought up or have these past karmas that are so bizarre that we actually, on a very deep level, consider God to be something antithetical to us. And we finally get ourselves organized, just get the house in order, get the heart in order, get the mind in order, and then we're going to ask for God's help. Swamiji remarked about this one person who was having great difficulty, and he was having terrible trouble, and Swami just sort of shook his head sadly and said, I can't help him, because he feels he has to figure it all out before he comes to talk to me. And of course he can't figure it all out, because the ego itself is just all embroiled in there, and then it persuades you. Oh, I'm having a hard time. This is my favorite. I don't want to impose my bad mood on my Guru Bhais. Right. Swamiji said that Satan insinuates himself, and the devil, I love the concept of the devil myself. It's very useful. My favorite phrase is, the devil made me do it. Don't you love that? I'm just going along, and then the devil made me do it. I know it has a different connotation, but the real point is our nature is divine. And then every so often we just, as I was saying to someone the other day, we just get on the wrong side of the question. We just sort of shift over to the other side and start heading down the wrong side of the road and don't realize we're doing it. And when I wake up from that, I like to think that the devil made me do it. So then I can reclaim, my own goodness. But it's our own ego, our own misidentification. We define ourselves by the wrong realities. And no matter how much God tells us that He loves us and that God is love, no matter how many times we read the story of the prodigal son and how much the divine rejoices when we finally turn in the right direction, regardless of anything, there's absolutely nothing. There's nothing we can do. And what I was starting to say, God is not shocked. He's unshockable. I mean, think about it. Think about the concept of omnipresence. Every horrible den of iniquity that you can imagine, it's right in the middle of God's creation. When Swami Kriyananda was being terribly persecuted through the law courts by extremely unscrupulous people, there was an attorney working against us. The man, he just lied about everything. Swami, later I read this in the Bhagavad Gita commentary. There's a certain mind that enjoys the power of telling lies for the confusion it creates. And he was an attorney at law, and if you've ever been involved in any kind of litigation, the capacity to actually prove when someone commits perjury is almost impossible, because the judges and the lawyers are all sort of in cahoots with each other and they don't really want to embarrass each other. It's theoretically possible, but extremely difficult. And a lot of the kinds of lawyers who give the profession a bad name have figured that out, and this was one of them. He was so undharmic. He just had no honor in him, and he was winning. In fact, in the end, he actually did win. I mean, in the tiny realm of court judgment, not in the realm of anything that matters a darn, but in there he did win. And Swamiji, one night, he was staying in our home, and he was staying in the upstairs bedroom, and I went upstairs. I thought he wasn't in the room, because the room was so silent, and it was evening and the light was off, and I sort of bustled in to fix the bed or something, and to my surprise, he was sitting on the bed. He was sitting cross-legged on the bed. He was just still as a stone. And the next morning, he spoke to us. I mean, he wasn't talking. I just went out. The next morning, he said, last night, he said, I really prayed to Babaji, he said. He said, I don't mind, you can destroy my life's work. It doesn't matter to me. I've done it for you. If you don't want it to continue, that's your choice. But why are you letting dishonorable people have power over me? And it was a real inner crisis for him. Why these dishonorable people? And the answer that Babaji gave him was this: they are all my children. Wow. You know, that just takes the whole thing to another dimension. Now, that doesn't mean that Master doesn't want, in the Battle of Kurukshetra, there are the Kauravas, and they're not so good. And they're the Pandavas, and they're honorable. And the Pandavas are forced by Krishna to crush the Kauravas, literally to kill them, to take back the kingdom. So it's not that we quietly sit there and say, oh well, let them overrun us. That's not the divine response. The Gita makes that very clear. But in our own selves, with the Battle of Kurukshetra, which is where the Gita really takes place, is within our own selves, just a little kindergarten girl. This side says, oh, you'll be happiest if you just indulge all your ego and just be as willful as you want to and just take and grab and think of no one else. That's how a kindergartner expresses it. My toy, my juice, my this, my that, kicking, hitting, We're not so different. We're a little more refined. But there's always that part. Do I grab for myself? Do I try to protect myself? Do I worry about all of my desires? Or do I trust God? But where Babaji's statement is important to us is to realize God is on all sides of the question. There's no place we can go where God isn't present, where God and Guru and the angels are not with us. They're always with us. It's only a question of whether we turn our attention and accept that presence. A friend of mine who wrote, he gave me a story, it's actually for the Loved and Protected book. And he had a very, I guess the only word is sordid would be the word that you would use. He had a rather sordid period in his life of drugs and other activities that are not ideal for a devotee. In fact, his story begins, you may think that being a deep devotee of Master and being a drug addict are contradictory. He says, I'm here to say they're not. And he said, of the many things that Master said, he said, it's no surprise that the one that stuck in my mind the most was, if you're going to do something that you know you ought not to be doing, take God with you. He likes that. And my friend wrote, I took him at his word. And I took him to a lot of places you might not think he would want to go. But in the end, as long as we hold on, then he comes back to us. The only way we can lose is to imagine that we're lost. Other than that, we're just having a little experience, and we're going to learn from it. And this brings me back to the theme that I was saying earlier. We just don't learn until we learn. Anybody can tell you, if you've tried to raise, if you are raising children or have raised children, you just want your kids to know it because you told them. How many parents in this room have found that to work after the child is 2, maybe up until the age of 2 before they can actually come back at you? You just think, my experience should be your experience. It's so fascinating. I'm just looking around the room here. Look how different each one of us are. And each one of us have exactly the same divine potential, but look how differently we all express it. There's no two of us alike, really, at all. And why then would we think that I can import my experience to you and my experience to you? You should just understand, this is the path, you should follow it, this is what you should do. It just never works. People have to experience it. And they have to experience it. We have to experience it again and again and again. Now, what our scripture is talking to us about today is, do not ever squander that opportunity. Don't let anything whispered from the wrong side tell you, oh, I can just do this. I don't have to go to the temple today. I don't really have to meditate this morning. I can really just go out and just booze it up just a little bit more. Maybe you can try it. But don't squander these opportunities. The more you drink it in, the more you take it into yourself, then your own experience becomes your teacher. In the building of the community and the temple that we have, my husband David and I were in the first wave of Ananda, a founding of Ananda colonies outside of Ananda village. When we started, there was one, we just said Ananda, and that meant Ananda village. In fact, as our community developed, we had to train everyone to say Ananda village. Now that's what people say. But they used to say Ananda mean the village. And we were building this whole community here in Palo Alto and here and this. I mean, this is just history. 25 years later, that which is unusual is just ordinary now. But in the context of doing that, others who came after would ask me, how do you define your job? And I said, to create inspiring moments together. Because that's what changes people. If you think about it for yourself, that's what changes each one of us. Whether that comes because you're alone in your room just reading a book. I was raised in a Jewish household which was essentially religiously neutral. Fortunately, I didn't grow up anti-Christian, but I didn't have any background in Christianity. It was just a flat plane. And in the 1970s, Shivani Xeroxed the old SRF magazines that had the articles of Master's commentary on the Bible, because it was 40 years before it was published. We actually had a big lawsuit over Shivani actually doing that, but that was a whole nother question. But I'm sitting there outside my trailer, just in a very pristine wilderness setting, sitting there, once in seclusion, just reading this. And he's telling me about Jesus in a way that I'd never, ever, ever heard anywhere, ever. Even just growing up in America, I'd absorbed a lot without studying it. And I realized nobody had ever told me the truth about this before, the truth from the point of view of the highest understanding. And this is all I'm saying. These moments of inspiration come at all times. And I just remember closing that book and sort of holding it, these Xerox sheets, just in my hand like this, and thinking, wow, look what I've stumbled into. You know, just by who knows why, all of a sudden I could feel that I was holding a truth in my hand that was very little known. And for some reason, I can only say, thank you, Lord, every day. Here it was, I had it in my hands, just like this. You know, those moments are to be enshrined. Enshrined. Master's advice for married couples, it's very sweet. He said, talk frequently about your courting days and your honeymoon. Remind yourselves constantly of why you came together and what the romance is about. I always thought that was so sweet. Okay? But it's also profound advice for the devotee. Don't ever take it for granted. Ever. I've been very fortunate in my life because most of my life has been spent talking to people who are relatively new. So I'm always getting to introduce someone. And I'm always getting to see that wide-eyed wonder begin to grow as the implications of God's role in our lives begin to sink in. And because of that, I can honestly say there has not been one day in my life, no matter how bad the days were, and we've all had a few, when I wasn't absolutely grateful for the whole thing. Now, you know, this is the difference. This is the laboratory of Ananda. I've seen it. You know, gratitude, appreciation, going back to the basics, not getting caught in the details, remembering why I'm here. And if you've had the good karma to pick up Autobiography of a Yogi, keep it under your pillow for the rest of your life. You know, just whatever tiny piece of it is really yours. Don't get lost in the other details. Because, as Babaji said, they're all my children. Even when your own conflicting soldiers, or the conflicting soldiers of who knows what, it's a very mixed world out here. If we had wanted a better planet, we would have incarnated on one. Whatever brought us here, it seemed like a good idea at the time. I definitely wonder a lot, but it must have been for a good reason. So whatever the torturous forces. They're all God's children. And they're all just helping us to hold on to the main event. You know, and then the people around us, we help them as we can. Just the little bit that we can. We were talking in the car, my mother died 12, 15 years ago, and I had so much that I could have offered her. But they didn't want it, really, my parents. They just didn't. They raised me well, and I'm forever grateful to them. And at the very end of my mother's life, this was her concession to my path, 40 years of my path. I don't know. I kind of like having you around. Maybe it has something to do with what you do. Like that. And that was enough. I didn't need more from that. That was fine. I had nothing to prove with her. And when she was, you know, she had Parkinson's, and so the end was predictable. Mother, are you afraid of dying? Oh, she said, I hate to think of all this going on and my not being here to be part of it. And I thought, oh, okay, there's not much I can say after that. You know, just God bless you and thank you for what you gave me, and go on your way. You can't make people want something they don't want. But you can preserve carefully what you have in your heart that you want. You know, failure will not take you off the path. Complete, utter, continuous disappointment and not really living up to your own ideas will not take you off the path. You can just stumble along, as I sometimes say, being Master's worst disciple. Somebody has to be at the bottom of the list. Yeah, I mean, of the whole massive, somebody's going to be the last. Just be the last. As I say, you're still on the list. That's the only thing that matters. What will take you off the path is the fear that somehow God doesn't love you anymore because. Whatever you want to say. When one of the primary disciples of Master, who was a nun at Mount Washington, Paramhansa actually, that's the one. She's a big disciple of Master, direct disciple. She went off and got married. Master didn't think it was such a great idea, but she did it. She went off, she got married, she had a child, and predictably, as Master knew it would, it didn't work out very well. So I go like this because I think she went across the country from California. Then she came back, child in tow, and there she is back again, and one of the more self-righteous of the other disciples. How dare you just come back after disobeying Master like this? Paramhansa just took no guff from anybody. She said, what did you want me to do? Just worship my mistake for the rest of my life? I mean, that's the attitude. You know? And it's embarrassing, believe me. That's the worst part of it. It's just embarrassing. You embarrass yourself, you embarrass your friends. But I always say to the people in the community, when people do things wrong, and this is the community, a Sangha everybody knows, you have a little more distance here, but when you all live together, everybody knows. And besides, we're so terribly intuitive, even if nobody says anything. That occurred to me very, very early on, that I had all this intuition about what was going on with other people, and oh my God, they probably had it about me. And I distinctly remember I was standing in this particular place looking at this bulletin board, you know, this is like 1972, and it just came over me like a wave that I was just as transparent to everyone else as they were to me. And I kind of held that thought for a minute and realized, you know, either I fully embrace that fearlessly or I won't be able to stay on the path. And I just said, here we are. After that, I used to say, better to sin enthusiastically in public. Better not to, I mean, I use the word sin lightly, better not to listen to the guy on the left that often. But when you do, you just do. And the only thing that you'll lose is if you just don't come back. It's very hard to believe in God's forgiving love. It's very hard to believe it. Last week, the reading was about Judas, and it's referenced. Master said that Judas was liberated in the last century. Took him 2,000 years to work it out. It was kind of a bad mistake, you know, but he got over it. He was a disciple of Ramakrishna. Jesus sent him to Ramakrishna. Master said, I knew him in this lifetime. What was he like? The disciples asked. Well, he kept quietly to himself, and he was still a little attached to money. That's what Master said about him. And when some of the other disciples started to tease him about this, Ramakrishna, the Guru, said, no, leave him alone. He suffered enough over that one. Imagine. I mean, it's both just chilling, and on the other side of it is, what could I do that could surprise God or dismay him? And the more we just embrace that, wholeheartedly, every time you shrink from the light, realize, no, there's no value in that. Just move right into it. A friend of mine she had certain attitudes that people were not fond of, and finally she just said, look, I'm part of this family and this is what I'm like. And she just said, get over it, like that. I love that. Sometimes I feel like saying that to God and Guru. I know, you've been trying to get me better for a long time, but I've still got this fault. Get over it, Just, you're going to have to work with me a little bit longer. There's so much freedom in that, isn't there? And you'll always stay on the path forever. You'll always be dedicated. If you worry, if you become ashamed, then you have to spend lifetimes just hiding out until you have the nerve to come back in. So just chain yourself to the post. And come what may, we are all God's children.